Hi, I'm Belinda, and welcome to Storytime with Belinda. Here, every story has a heartbeat, and each one is made to connect with you. Whether we're exploring a far off land or talking about something close to home, I hope you find a little piece of yourself in each tale. Let's get started, and thank you for being here. The Banshee, a figure of eerie beauty and sorrow, is one of the most iconic spirits of Irish folklore. Her wailing cry, a sound both mournful and unearthly, is said to herald impending death for those destined to die or for their loved ones. For centuries, her lament has been passed down in tales and whispers, connecting Irish families to their ancestors and the mystical realm of the Sith, or fairy mounds. The Banshee is not merely a harbinger of doom, but also a cultural touchstone, representing the Irish relationship with death, mourning, and fate. This video delves deep into her origins, characteristics, symbolism, and modern interpretations, unraveling the threads of this mystical figure that has captivated and terrified generations. To understand the origins of the Banshee, we must first explore the Celtic worldview, which was deeply intertwined with the supernatural. The Celts believed in a complex cosmology where the physical and spiritual realms were interconnected. This belief was reflected in the concept of the otherworld, a mystical realm inhabited by gods, spirits, and ancestors. Unlike many modern interpretations of the afterlife, the otherworld was not necessarily a place of reward or punishment, but a parallel reality where life continued after death. Central to this belief system was the Sith or fairy mounds, which were thought to be portals to the otherworld. The Banshee, Banshee in Irish, meaning woman of the fairy mound, was seen as a messenger from this realm, existing between the worlds of the living and the dead. Her presence symbolized the fragile veil between life and death, reminding the Celts of their mortality and the spiritual forces that govern their lives. The Banshee's origins are closely tied to the prominent role of women in Celtic spiritual and social systems. Women often held positions of power as druids, healers, and seers, serving as intermediaries between humanity and the divine. The Banshee embodies this intermediary role, acting as a guide and messenger who communicates the inevitability of death. Additionally, the act of keening, a form of vocal lamentation, was traditionally performed by women during funerals. This cultural practice, where mourners expressed grief through wailing and song, likely influenced the Banshee's depiction as a keening spirit. These women were not merely mourners, but preservers of communal memory, reinforcing the bonds between the living and the dead. The Banshee's characteristics bear a striking resemblance to certain deities and mythological figures in early Irish mythology, suggesting that she may have evolved from older traditions. The Morrigan, a powerful goddess associated with war, fate, and death, is often linked to the origins of the Banshee. Known as a shapeshifter, the Morrigan would appear in various forms, such as a maiden, a hag, or a crow, on battlefields to foretell death or influence its outcome. Her cries of lamentation and her role as a harbinger of death parallel the Banshee's wail. However, unlike the Banshee, the Morrigan's role was more active, involving direct intervention in human affairs. Brigid, a goddess associated with poetry, healing, and prophecy, is another figure who may have influenced the Banshee's image. In her aspect as a poet, Brigid was connected to the power of the spoken and sung word, including laments for the dead. Her presence underscores the importance of vocal expression in Celtic mourning traditions. Furthermore, the concept of triple goddesses, common in Celtic mythology, resonates with the Banshee's varied forms as a young maiden, a middle-aged matron, or an old crone. These forms reflect the three stages of life and their connection to the cycles of nature, death, and rebirth. Another figure closely tied to the Banshee is the Bean Nye, washerwoman at the ford, a spirit seen washing the bloody clothes of those destined to die. The Bean Nye shares the Banshee's role as a death omen, and her presence emphasizes the inevitability of fate. However, the Bean Nye is more directly connected to battlefield deaths, whereas the Banshee serves a broader familial role. Before the Christianization of Ireland, the Celts placed great emphasis on honoring their dead and maintaining strong ties with their ancestors. Funerary rituals often involved elaborate ceremonies, including the lighting of fires, offerings of food and drink, and the keening lamentations of mourners. The Banshee's association with specific families, particularly noble clans like the Onals and O'Briens, may stem from these ancestral traditions. It was believed that the spirits of ancestors played an active role in protecting their descendants. The Banshee, as a family guardian, served as both a mourner and a spiritual guide, connecting the living with their heritage and the otherworld. The Druids, the priestly class of the Celts, held profound knowledge of nature, spirituality, and the cycles of life and death. They believed in the concept of predestination, where an individual's fate was determined by forces beyond their control. The Banshee's cry, foretelling death, reflects this druidic understanding of destiny. Additionally, Druids saw sound and song as powerful tools for spiritual connection and transformation. The Banshee's wail can be viewed as a continuation of this belief, using sound to bridge the mortal and spiritual realms. The Banshee's image is deeply tied to the natural world. Her appearance, often described as shrouded in mist, with hair flowing like water or robes glimmering like moonlight, evokes the elemental forces of air and water, both symbols of transition and liminality in Celtic mythology. The wind. The Banshee's wail is often said to ride on the wind, connecting her to the natural forces that carry messages across the land. The water. Like the Bean Nye, the Banshee is frequently associated with rivers, lakes, and streams, symbolizing the boundary between worlds. These natural elements reinforce the Banshee's role as a liminal figure, standing between life and death, the known and the unknown. The Banshee's ancient origins are rooted in the rich spiritual and cultural traditions of the Celts. Emerging from a worldview that saw death not as an end but as a transformation, she embodies the interconnectedness of the mortal and the divine. Her cry echoes the keening songs of mourning women, the laments of goddesses like the Morrigan, and the ancestral reverence of Celtic clans. Her story is not only one of sorrow and forewarning, but also a reminder of the enduring ties between the living and the dead, a connection that has resonated across centuries and continues to captivate modern imaginations. The Banshee's physical appearance is as varied as the legends that describe her, reflecting her role as a supernatural being who exists beyond the constraints of human reality. While some common features persist across accounts, her form often changes depending on the storyteller, region, and era. This fluidity highlights her liminal nature. She is neither fully human nor entirely otherworldly, but something in between. There are three archetypal forms: The young maiden. In some tales, the Banshee appears as a stunningly beautiful young woman with long, flowing hair. Her beauty is often described as otherworldly, with an ethereal glow to her skin and eyes that gleam with sadness. This form ties her to the concept of the Banshee as a spirit of the fairy mounds, Civ, where beauty and allure are common traits of supernatural beings. The matronly woman. Occasionally, the Banshee is depicted as a middle-aged woman, often robed in a somber cloak or veil. In this form, she appears more grounded, emphasizing her role as a keening mourner, a spiritual mother figure who grieves for the dead and the dying. The hag or crone, perhaps her most infamous form, the Banshee as a crone is a grotesque and terrifying figure. Her hair is wild and unkempt, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping, and her face deeply lined. Some descriptions liken her to a corpse, with sunken cheeks and skeletal limbs. This form reinforces her association with death and decay, making her presence unmistakably ominous. The Banshee's clothing is as spectral as her form, often described as a flowing robe or dress that shimmers in the moonlight or glows faintly in the dark. Her garments are typically white, symbolizing death, purity, or the otherworld. In some accounts, however, her attire is dark and ragged, lending her an even more foreboding presence. One of the Banshee's most striking features is her hair, which is often depicted as long, flowing, and unnaturally vivid. It may be silvery, fiery red, or stark white, depending on the legend. In Irish culture, hair held significant symbolic power. It could represent vitality, identity, or even a connection to the supernatural. The Banshee's hair, wild and untamed, reinforces her otherworldly nature. The Banshee's eyes are described as her most haunting feature. In many tales, they are red and swollen from weeping, radiating sorrow and pain. Her expression may range from grief-stricken to eerily calm, or even menacing. These descriptions emphasize her emotional connection to death and her dual role as both mourner and harbinger. If her appearance is unsettling, the Banshee's cry is utterly haunting. It is her most defining trait and the primary way she interacts with the living world. Her wail is a powerful auditory phenomenon, resonating with a mixture of sorrow, fear, and the inevitability of death. The Banshee's cry has been compared to several unsettling sounds: a piercing wail, high-pitched and heart-rending. This cry is said to send shivers down the spine of anyone who hears it. A mournful keening, echoing the traditional Irish practice of keening at funerals, her cry carries an overwhelming sense of loss and despair. A scream of anguish. In some tales, her voice is more akin to a blood-curdling scream, filled with rage or torment. Hearing the Banshee's cry is described as an intensely emotional experience, evoking dread, sorrow, or even physical discomfort. It is said to cut through the stillness of the night, striking fear into those who hear it. For families connected to the Banshee, her cry is not just a sound, but a deeply personal omen of impending death. The Banshee's wail typically occurs at night, often just before the death of a family member. It is commonly heard outside the home, carried on the wind, or emanating from nearby forests or rivers. Her cry may be a warning for the family to prepare for loss, reinforcing her role as a spiritual protector. The description of the Banshee's cry differs by region. In the north, Her cry is said to be a mournful and eerie lament. In the south, it may resemble the screech of an owl or the howling of wind through the trees. In the west, her cry is likened to the sobbing of a woman or the anguished call of an animal in pain. The banshee's wail is often mistaken for natural phenomena, such as the cry of a fox or the screech of an owl. The sound of wind whistling through cracks or over open plains. This blending of supernatural and natural sounds enhances her mystique and highlights her deep connection to the natural world. In Irish culture, sound and song hold significant spiritual importance. The act of keening, for instance, was not just a display of grief, but a means of communicating with the spirit world. The banshee's cry may be seen as an otherworldly extension of this tradition, carrying both emotional weight and supernatural power. The banshee's cry symbolizes transition and inevitability. It serves as a reminder of life's fragility and the ever-present shadow of death. For the family who hears it, the wail is both a source of fear and a call to honor the dying and the dead. Beyond its cultural symbolism, the banshee's cry taps into primal human fears. Its high-pitched tone and suddenness evoke a fight-or-flight response, heightening the listener's awareness of their vulnerability. This psychological effect reinforces the banshee's role as an omen of death, making her presence unforgettable. The banshee's physical manifestations and her haunting cry are central to her identity as a supernatural figure. Her shifting forms reflect the fluid boundaries between life and death, beauty and decay, protection and terror. Similarly, her cry, whether mournful or blood-curdling, speaks to the universality of grief and the inevitability of mortality. The banshee's enduring power lies in her ability to evoke both fear and reverence, reminding us of the mysterious forces that govern life and the profound connection between the living and the dead. At the core of the banshee's mythology lies her role as a stark reminder of life's impermanence. In Irish society, where death was not merely an end but a transition into the otherworld, the banshee symbolized the inevitability of this journey. Her presence, though terrifying, served to prepare families for the reality of loss. The banshee's wail functioned as a form of memento mori, a symbolic reminder of mortality. By forewarning families of death, she encouraged them to confront their fears of the unknown and to honor their loved ones before it was too late. This reflection on mortality was a deeply ingrained part of Irish spiritual life, aligning with the belief in cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The banshee's cry, piercing and unignorable, was a stark acknowledgement of human fragility. Her role as a harbinger of death underscored the belief that death could strike at any moment, reinforcing the need to live in harmony with the spiritual and natural worlds. The banshee is not just a figure of fear, but also a cultural icon, embodying aspects of Irish identity, history, and collective memory. Traditionally, the banshee was associated with Ireland's noble families, such as the O'Neills, O'Briens, and McCarthys. Her role as a family guardian reflected the strong bonds of kinship and lineage that were central to Irish society. This connection to noble clans elevated her from a mere spirit to a custodian of familial legacy. The banshee is one of the most recognizable figures in Irish folklore, representing a unique aspect of Ireland's cultural heritage. Her tales have been passed down through generations, serving as a link between the ancient Celtic past and modern Irish identity. The Banshee's identity as a female spirit highlights the cultural significance of women in Irish society, particularly in the realms of mourning and spirituality. Women were often the keepers of familial and communal memory, and the Banshee's role as a keening figure mirrors these responsibilities. Her presence reinforces the idea of women as mediators between the living and the dead. Although the Banshee is often portrayed as terrifying, she also served as a source of comfort in Irish society. Her cry was not just an omen, but a reassurance that death was part of a greater cosmic order. The Banshee's connection to specific families suggests a protective role. By forewarning them of impending death, she allowed families to prepare for loss and to honor the dying with proper rituals. This protective aspect humanizes her, making her a figure of sorrow rather than malevolence. The Banshee's keening cry can be interpreted as an expression of grief on behalf of the departed soul. In this way, she acted as an intermediary, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. Her presence reminded families that their loved ones were not alone in their journey to the other world. The Banshee's cry is laden with symbolic meaning, representing both personal loss and universal truths. Her cry is said to resonate from the liminal spaces of nature, rivers, forests, and windswept hills, emphasizing her role as a guide between the mortal world and the other world. These natural settings symbolize the boundaries between life and death, further deepening her connection to the spiritual realm. In Irish culture, sound was often considered a conduit for spiritual expression. The Banshee's cry, haunting and otherworldly, served as a powerful auditory symbol of loss and transformation. It transcended language, communicating grief and forewarning through pure emotion. In communities where death affected not just families but entire villages, the Banshee's cry could be seen as an extension of communal mourning. Her wail echoed the shared sorrow of loss, uniting the living in grief and remembrance. The Banshee's symbolic power is deeply tied to the natural world, which was central to Celtic spirituality and Irish culture. The Banshee is often described as appearing near rivers, forests, or hills, places imbued with mystical significance in Celtic mythology. Her connection to these landscapes reinforces her identity as a spirit tied to the land, embodying its beauty, mystery, and danger. The Banshee's association with wind and water reflects her role as a liminal figure. The wind, carrying her wail across the countryside, symbolizes the unseen forces of fate, while water, with its reflective and transformative properties, represents the passage between worlds. Some legends tie the Banshee's appearance to the changing seasons, particularly autumn and winter, when nature undergoes cycles of death and dormancy. Her presence during these times underscores the cyclical nature of life and death. The Banshee's role has evolved over time, reflecting shifts in Irish society and its relationship with death and folklore. In ancient Celtic culture, death was seen as a transformation rather than an end. The Banshee, as a messenger of this transition, symbolized a sacred connection to the other world. Her presence was both feared and respected, embodying the duality of life and death. With the arrival of Christianity in Ireland, the Banshee's role was reinterpreted through a Christian lens. While still feared, she became more closely associated with sin and judgment, reflecting the Church's emphasis on moral accountability in the afterlife. In contemporary Ireland, the Banshee remains a powerful cultural symbol, representing the enduring legacy of Irish folklore. She is featured in literature, art, and media, often serving as a metaphor for loss, change, or the haunting presence of the past. Among Irish emigrants, the Banshee became a poignant symbol of home and heritage. Her stories were carried to new lands, preserving a connection to Irish identity and the shared experiences of grief and resilience. The Banshee's symbolism and cultural role in Irish society are deeply multifaceted, encompassing themes of mortality, spirituality, and identity. As a figure of both fear and reverence, she embodies the universal human experience of loss while remaining uniquely tied to Ireland's rich cultural heritage. Through her wail and her presence, she continues to remind us of the delicate balance between life and death, the individual and the collective, and the past and the present. The Banshee's origins can be traced back to ancient Celtic spirituality, where she was closely tied to the otherworld and the natural cycles of life and death. In this era, she was not merely a harbinger of death, but a deeply symbolic figure representing the interconnectedness of all things. The Banshee, Banshee, meaning woman of the mound, was part of the Tuatha De Danann, the mythical beings who retreated to the fairy mounds, Siv, after the arrival of humankind. These mounds were believed to be portals to the otherworld, associating the Banshee with liminal spaces, places where the veil between worlds was thin. As a member of the fairy folk, she was neither good nor evil but existed in a realm of moral neutrality, fulfilling her role as a mediator between the living and the dead. The Banshee's cry likely originated from the tradition of keening Caoinet, a ritual lament performed by women at funerals to honor the deceased and guide their spirit to the afterlife. In this context, the Banshee was seen as an otherworldly extension of the human keener, symbolizing a sacred connection between mortals and the divine. Early Celts viewed death as part of a natural cycle, with the Banshee embodying the inevitability of life's end. Her association with nature, haunting rivers, forests, and hills, reinforced her role as a spirit intrinsically tied to the land and its rhythms. The arrival of Christianity in Ireland, circa 4th to 5th century, brought significant shifts in religious and cultural beliefs, which began to reshape the Banshee's mythology. Under Christian influence, the Banshee was no longer seen as an impartial figure, but began to carry moral connotations. Her cry was interpreted as a spiritual warning, urging the dying or their family to repent and prepare for the afterlife. This shift aligned her role with Christian teachings about sin, judgment, and salvation, though she retained her ties to the otherworld. Christian authorities often demonized pre-Christian deities and spirits, framing them as malevolent beings. In some stories, the Banshee became associated with punishment, serving as a harbinger of not just death, but divine retribution. However, the Banshee's strong ties to mourning and familial loyalty allowed her to maintain a more ambivalent, rather than wholly negative, role in Irish folklore. Christian funeral rites gradually absorb elements of Celtic traditions, blending keening practices with prayers for the dead. The Banshee's cry began to represent both pagan lamentation and Christian intercession for the soul's journey. By the medieval period, the Banshee evolved into a figure more closely associated with specific families, reflecting Ireland's clan-based societal structure. During this time, the Banshee was said to appear to noble families, particularly those with ancient lineages such as the O'Neills, O'Briens, and McCarthys. Her role was not to cause death, but to forewarn it, ensuring that the family could honor their loved one with proper rites. This reinforced her position as a guardian spirit tied to kinship and legacy. As literacy was limited, stories of the Banshee were preserved through oral tradition. Her image varied between regions, influenced by local customs and beliefs. In some accounts, she appeared as a beautiful maiden mourning a tragic death, while in others, she was a fearsome crone whose wail chilled the blood. The Banshee's association with nobility emphasized the importance of heritage and lineage in medieval Ireland. Her cry served as both an omen and a reminder of a family's historical significance. The 19th century saw a resurgence of interest in Irish folklore, driven by Romanticism and a growing desire to preserve national identity amid colonial rule. Irish writers and folklorists, such as Lady Gregory and W.B. Yeats, collected and retold stories of the Banshee, presenting her as a central figure in Irish mythology. This period romanticized the Banshee, emphasizing her mournful beauty and tragic role, which appealed to Victorian tastes for Gothic and supernatural themes. As Ireland struggled under British colonization, the Banshee became a symbol of cultural resilience, representing the enduring power of Irish traditions. Her association with death and mourning resonated deeply in a time of famine, emigration, and political turmoil, reflecting the collective grief of the Irish people. The Banshee became a popular subject in poetry, plays, and paintings, where she was often depicted as both a terrifying and sorrowful figure. Her wail, once a personal omen, came to symbolize broader themes of loss and national identity. In the modern era, the Banshee has continued to evolve, influenced by global media and changing societal attitudes toward folklore. The Banshee has appeared in films, television, and literature, often as a Gothic or horror figure. While these portrayals sometimes stray from her traditional role, they have helped to keep her legend alive. Examples include Banshee-like characters in supernatural TV shows like Supernatural and Teen Wolf, and references in fantasy novels. In contemporary interpretations, the Banshee is often seen as a symbol of feminine power, embodying both the strength and vulnerability of women in their roles as mourners and protectors. Her haunting cry has been reinterpreted as a voice for the voiceless, giving expression to grief, rage, and resilience. The Banshee remains a prominent figure in neo-pagan and Celtic spirituality, where she is revered as a guardian of the otherworld and a guide for souls. Her connection to nature and the cycles of life and death continues to resonate in an era of ecological awareness and spiritual renewal. Among the Irish diaspora, the Banshee has become a cherished symbol of heritage, appearing in stories and traditions passed down through generations. Her legend has been adapted to new contexts, blending Irish folklore with the cultural experiences of immigrant communities. The Banshee's mythology has evolved dramatically over the ages, reflecting Ireland's changing cultural, religious, and historical landscape. From her roots as a fairy spirit in Celtic paganism to her role as a Christian warning figure, and finally to her modern incarnations as a symbol of grief and identity, the Banshee remains a powerful and enduring figure. Her ability to adapt to new contexts while retaining her essence ensures that she will continue to haunt and inspire for generations to come. While the Banshee holds a distinct place in Irish folklore, her characteristics are echoed in the mythologies and legends of other cultures. These spirits, like the Banshee, serve as omens, protectors, or symbols of death and mourning. The universality of such figures highlights shared human concerns about mortality, loss, and the afterlife. La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, is a spectral figure from Latin American folklore. She is said to wander rivers and lakes, mourning her drowned children. Similar to the Banshee, her wailing is both a lament for personal grief and a warning of danger or death. While the Banshee is more detached from personal tragedy, La Llorona is deeply tied to her own narrative of sorrow and guilt. Both figures reflect the enduring power of sound, whether a wail or a scream, as a harbinger of the supernatural. White lady figures appear in European folklore, often as ghostly apparitions linked to tragic love stories or unresolved grief. These spirits, like the Banshee, are often bound to specific locations or families. In some stories, the White Lady serves as a protector, warning against harm or danger, while in others, her presence signals death. The Banshee's familial attachment mirrors this protective yet ominous role, emphasizing their shared thematic focus on death and legacy. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the Preta is a restless spirit trapped between realms due to unfulfilled desires or sins. Often depicted as gaunt and wailing, these spirits are consumed by longing and grief. While the Banshee serves as a warning rather than a punishment, both figures underscore the torment of those tied to the mortal world by unresolved connections or spiritual imbalance. The Banshee's mournful cry and the Preta's desperate wails highlight the spiritual resonance of sound as a medium for communicating anguish. The aswang is a shape-shifting spirit from Filipino folklore, often associated with omens of death. Unlike the Banshee, the aswang is a more malevolent entity, preying on humans rather than simply serving as a harbinger. However, both figures share the role of death's heralds, evoking dread and highlighting the fragility of life. The Banshee's attachment to specific families is also mirrored in tales where the aswang targets communities or households. The Kukuseikana, or slit-mouthed woman, is a vengeful spirit in Japanese folklore known for terrifying encounters. While she is less connected to death warnings and more associated with violent revenge, her eerie presence and haunting voice echo the Banshee's unsettling nature. Both figures create a palpable tension between the supernatural and the mortal, rooted in fear of the unknown. Yurei are spirits in Japanese folklore that return to the mortal world due to unresolved emotions, such as anger, sorrow, or revenge. Like the Banshee, they are often depicted as pale, ethereal figures dressed in white. The Banshee's wail parallels the sorrowful aura of the Yurei, emphasizing their shared role as mourners for the dead. While the Banshee is tied to familial warnings, Yurei are more generalized representations of lingering emotional ties to the living world. The Wendigo, a figure from indigenous North American lore, is a malevolent spirit associated with death, greed, and cannibalism. While its focus is more on punishment and consumption, the Wendigo's eerie howls and connection to winter's desolation echo the Banshee's mournful cry. Both figures serve as reminders of humanity's vulnerability to forces beyond comprehension, rooted in deep fears of isolation and mortality. Across these diverse traditions, common themes emerge. The wail, scream, or lament is a universal symbol of grief and impending danger. These figures represent transitions, whether literal death or spiritual change. Many of these spirits, like the Banshee, are tied to specific groups, underscoring the importance of kinship and collective mourning. The Banshee's role as a death messenger resonates across cultures, highlighting shared human concerns about the inevitability of loss and the desire for connection with the unknown. The Banshee and the O'Neill family. One of the most famous legends involves the noble O'Neill family, whose history is closely tied to Ireland's ancient past. The story goes that a banshee appeared near their ancestral home, wailing mournfully before the death of a beloved patriarch. The banshee's cry was heard by multiple members of the household, each describing a ghostly figure draped in a gray cloak with streaming silver hair. When the death occurred the next morning, her wail was seen as a confirmation of her supernatural warning. The tragic tale of Aine, the keening spirit. Aine, a woman whose unrequited love ended in her tragic death, is said to have become a banshee after her passing. Her spirit roamed the hills of County Limerick, weeping for lost lovers and warning villagers of impending tragedies. In some variations, Aine is described as a beautiful maiden, her cries carrying both sorrow and longing. This tale ties the Banshee's lament to themes of unfulfilled love and eternal mourning. The McCarthy Harpist and the Banshee. In this story, a traveling harpist stayed with the McCarthy family of County Cork. One evening, he heard an eerie wail coming from the nearby forest. Despite his host's warnings, he ventured out and encountered a banshee combing her long hair with a silver comb. The banshee vanished when he approached, but her cry returned later that night, signaling the death of the family's elder. This tale highlights the banshee's association with music, hair combs, a symbol of vanity and fate, and her role as a nocturnal figure. Different parts of Ireland have unique interpretations and tales involving the banshee, influenced by local customs and beliefs. The water banshee of Lough Neagh, Northern Ireland. This version of the banshee is tied to Lough Neagh, a vast lake in Northern Ireland. Local lore describes a banshee who appears near the water, her cries amplified by the waves. Fishermen report seeing her at the lake's edge on misty mornings, her hair dripping wet, as she warns them of storms or personal tragedies. The connection to water in this legend emphasizes her role as a guardian of liminal spaces. The fiery banshee of County Clare. In County Clare, the banshee is said to appear with an otherworldly glow, her presence accompanied by strange lights or flickering flames. This fiery aspect ties her to the supernatural forces of the land, possibly influenced by ancient pagan beliefs in fire as a purifying and spiritual element. The silent banshee of Kilkenny. A unique tale from Kilkenny describes a banshee who never wails but instead appears in complete silence. Her presence alone is enough to instill dread, as she is said to stand by the windows of a house where someone will soon die. This variation adds an unsettling twist to her mythology, as the absence of sound heightens her spectral menace. Although the banshee is rooted in folklore, numerous accounts from witnesses claim to have encountered her, particularly during the 18th and 19th centuries, when belief in her presence was widespread. The Keening of Lord Tyrone, 1690. Historical records describe an incident involving Lord Tyrone, whose household reported hearing a banshee's keening shortly before his unexpected death. Guests at a family gathering claimed to have seen a spectral woman in white disappearing into the woods, her cries lingering in the air. The Journal of Lady Fanshawe, 17th century. In her memoirs, Lady and Fanshawe, an Englishwoman, recounted a chilling experience during her stay at a friend's castle in Ireland. She awoke in the night to see a ghostly woman outside her window, her hair flowing and her expression mournful. Moments later, the Banshee let out a piercing wail. The next day, a family member died suddenly, validating the omen. The O'Brien family's curse, 19th century. A well-documented story from the 19th century tells of the O'Brien family, who claimed to hear the banshees cry before several untimely deaths in quick succession. The family's belief in the banshees' warning was so strong that they performed elaborate protective rituals, including burying silver combs and offerings to appease the spirit. The wailing heard by Irish soldiers in World War I. During World War I, Irish soldiers reported hearing wailing sounds on misty nights in the trenches, which they interpreted as the Banshee mourning their comrades who were about to die in battle. This story demonstrates the Banshee's enduring symbolism even in modern conflicts. The Banshee's legend has traveled with Irish emigrants, taking on new dimensions in different cultural contexts. The Boston Banshee, United States. Irish immigrants in Boston tell stories of a banshee-like figure haunting the docks, warning families of impending tragedies, particularly involving sailors lost at sea. These tales often blend traditional banshee elements with maritime lore, reflecting the challenges and dangers faced by immigrant communities. The Banshee of Newfoundland, Canada. In Newfoundland, a region with strong Irish roots, stories persist of a banshee-like spirit appearing in coastal villages. This figure is said to knock on doors before vanishing, her silent presence heralding the death of a loved one. Modern urban legends. In contemporary diasporic communities, the banshee has become a figure of urban folklore. Some stories describe her appearing in dreams or as a shadowy presence in modern settings, such as hospitals or suburban neighborhoods, adapting her ancient role to a modern world. Many authors and artists have drawn inspiration from banshee legends, creating vivid retellings and adaptations. The Irish writer Lady Augusta Gregory included detailed banshee stories in her collections of folklore, presenting her as both a tragic and terrifying figure. These tales emphasize the banshee's connection to Irish nobility and her dual role as a mourner and omen. Yeats referenced the banshee in his works, aligning her with Ireland's spiritual and mystical heritage. His poetry often explored themes of death and the supernatural, casting the banshee as a guardian of Irish tradition. The banshee has appeared in movies, TV shows, and books, often as a gothic or horror figure. While some portrayals focus on her eerie cry, others delve into her backstory, portraying her as a tragic or vengeful spirit. In modern Ireland, the banshee's legend persists, though often as a nostalgic symbol rather than a literal belief. Many regions in Ireland celebrate the banshee as part of their cultural heritage, offering tours and storytelling events that highlight her legend. Museums and folklore centers often display artifacts and records tied to banshee lore, keeping her story alive for future generations. The banshee has become a metaphor for grief, resilience, and the enduring connection between past and present. Her cry, once feared, now serves as a reminder of Ireland's rich cultural tapestry. The banshee's stories, legends, and documented encounters offer a rich tapestry of Irish cultural and spiritual history. From her ancient role as a keening spirit to her presence in modern urban legends, she remains a deeply compelling figure. Her tales bridge the worlds of the living and the dead, the old and the new, embodying universal themes of loss, memory, and the mysteries of fate. The Banshee has long been a figure of fascination in literature, symbolizing themes of loss, fate, and the supernatural. Her appearances in written works range from folklore collections to modern fiction. Early efforts to preserve Irish folklore in written form brought the Banshee into the literary canon. Notable examples include Lady Augusta Gregory's Visions and Beliefs in the West of Ireland, 1920. Gregory collected oral accounts of Banshee sightings, presenting her as both a tragic and mystical figure. Her work emphasized the Banshee's role as a familial guardian and a mourner of noble bloodlines. Thomas Crofton Croker's Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, 1825. Croker provided detailed Banshee stories, including accounts of her eerie cries and their ominous significance. His descriptions of the Banshee contributed to her popular image in Victorian-era folklore. Writers in the Gothic and Romantic traditions frequently drew upon the Banshee as a symbol of grief, mystery, and the otherworldly. Edgar Allan Poe, though not Irish, he was influenced by Gothic themes, created characters and settings that echo the mournful, haunting qualities of the Banshee. Irish Gothic writers, such as Sheridan Le Fanu, infused their tales with spectral figures reminiscent of Banshee lore, emphasizing the eerie beauty of her cry and her connection to death. Contemporary authors have adapted the Banshee myth, incorporating her into genres such as fantasy, horror, and young adult fiction. Catherine Fisher's The Dark Henge, 2005. This fantasy novel features a banshee-like figure, blending traditional Irish folklore with modern storytelling. Patricia Lysott's The Banshee, The Irish Death Messenger, 1986. Though more academic in nature, this work delves into the cultural significance of the Banshee, influencing modern writers who draw inspiration from her mythology. Poets have also embraced the Banshee as a muse, exploring her mournful cry and ethereal presence in verse. W.B. Yeats often referenced the Banshee indirectly in his exploration of Irish folklore and the spiritual connection between humanity and the natural world. Contemporary poets like Seamus Heaney have drawn on Ireland's rich folkloric tradition, with echoes of the Banshee's lament present in their themes of loss and memory. The Banshee's mournful cry has inspired musicians across genres, from traditional Irish ballads to modern compositions. The Banshee's legend is deeply rooted in Irish musical traditions, particularly in keening songs, Ceoinette, which mimic her mournful wail. These songs were traditionally performed at wakes and funerals to honor the dead. Sean-nós singing. This ancient style of Irish singing often evokes the Banshee's lament, with its haunting, unaccompanied melodies that reflect themes of sorrow and loss. Numerous Irish ballads reference the Banshee, using her as a symbol of tragedy and forewarning. The Banshee's Cry is a traditional Irish tune that captures her eerie presence through a slow, mournful melody. Songs like The Lament of the Banshee recount tales of her appearances and the deaths that follow. The Banshee has also found a place in classical compositions, where her legend inspires dramatic and atmospheric works. Henry Cowell's The Banshee, 1925. This avant-garde piano piece mimics the Banshee's cry through unconventional techniques, such as plucking and scraping the piano strings. The result is a haunting, otherworldly soundscape. In contemporary music, the banshee often appears as a metaphor for heartbreak, doom, or spiritual longing. Bands like Dead Can Dance and Clannad incorporate banshee-like themes in their ethereal, Celtic-inspired music. The banshee's wail has also influenced the vocal styles of modern artists, particularly in the realms of gothic rock and dark ambient music. From film to television and video games, the banshee has been reimagined for modern audiences, blending her traditional elements with contemporary storytelling. The banshee's eerie presence and dramatic role as a death messenger make her a compelling character for visual media. Darby O'Gill and the Little People, 1959. This Disney film features a terrifying depiction of the banshee, blending traditional Irish folklore with cinematic fantasy. The banshee's spectral appearance and wailing cry are central to the film's climactic scenes. Supernatural, 2005 to 2020. The banshee appears as a vengeful spirit in one episode, highlighting her versatility as both a harbinger and a threat in modern horror narratives. Teen Wolf, 2011 to 2017. In this popular series, the character Lydia Martin discovers her powers as a banshee, giving the myth a modern, empowering twist. Her banshee abilities allow her to detect death and danger, blending folklore with supernatural drama. The banshee has become a popular figure in gaming, often portrayed as a ghostly antagonist or mystical guide. Mass Effect 3, 2012. The banshee appears as a terrifying enemy, combining the traditional wailing cry with a futuristic, alien design. The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, 2015. Banshee-like creatures, tied to death and despair, reflect the game's deep engagement with European folklore. The banshee has been reinterpreted in comics, where her cry often manifests as a superpower. Marvel's Banshee. Sean Cassidy, the Irish superhero known as Banshee, uses his sonic scream as a weapon, blending traditional mythology with modern comic book storytelling. The Sandman, 1989 to 1996. Neil Gaiman's work frequently incorporates banshee-like characters, exploring themes of death, fate, and the supernatural. The banshee has influenced urban legends and horror stories, where her wail serves as a chilling premonition of doom. Films like The Conjuring and The Grudge feature ghostly figures whose cries echo the banshee's mournful lament, even if they are not explicitly based on her myth. Creepypasta and online horror forums frequently reference banshee-like entities, demonstrating her adaptability in the digital age. In modern media, the banshee transcends her traditional Irish origins to become a global symbol of grief, mystery, and feminine power. In contemporary reinterpretations, the banshee is often portrayed as a strong, independent figure, embodying the power of mourning and resilience. This aligns with feminist readings of folklore, which highlight the banshee's role as a vocal, active participant in life's transitions. Films, books, and music ensure that the banshee remains a relevant and evocative figure, connecting modern audiences to Ireland's rich cultural heritage. The banshee's presence in literature, music, and modern media demonstrates her enduring appeal as a multifaceted figure. Whether portrayed as a ghostly mourner, a powerful protector, or a chilling antagonist, she continues to captivate audiences with her timeless themes of death, fate, and the supernatural. Through these artistic expressions, the banshee transcends her folkloric roots, becoming a universal symbol of life's mysteries and the human confrontation with mortality. The Banshee occupies a unique space in Irish folklore as a figure that transcends the material world. Beyond her role as a death messenger, she serves as a powerful symbol of transformation, liminality, and the human psyche's relationship with mortality. Exploring the Banshee through psychospiritual lenses offers a deeper understanding of her mythological significance. The Banshee can be viewed as a psychopomp, a figure who guides souls through the transition from life to death. In many cultures, similar entities such as the Greek Charon or the Egyptian Anubis serve as escorts for the deceased. Her role as a harbinger of death aligns with the archetypal function of helping humans prepare emotionally and spiritually for loss. By warning families of impending death, she allows time for closure, reconciliation, and the performance of necessary rituals. Carl Jung's concept of the anima, the feminine aspect of the collective unconscious, resonates with the Banshee's symbolic nature. As a mysterious, otherworldly female figure, the Banshee represents the emotional and intuitive forces that dwell within the human psyche. Her wailing can be interpreted as the subconscious mind mourning impending change or loss, emphasizing her role as a spiritual mediator. The Banshee also aligns with the archetype of the crone in mythology, embodying wisdom, transformation, and the mysteries of life and death. In psychospiritual terms, the Banshee's cry can symbolize the mind's intuitive recognition of danger or impending loss. Her wailing might be understood as an auditory manifestation of the human fear of death, a primal response to the unknown. This aligns with the Jungian concept of the shadow self, where repressed fears and emotions surface in symbolic or dreamlike forms. The Banshee exists in liminal spaces, neither fully of the mortal world nor entirely of the spirit realm. This boundary-crossing aspect gives her a unique role as a mediator between life and death. Liminal figures often appear in folklore to guide humans through transformative phases. The Banshee's presence at the threshold of death reflects her function as a guardian of life's ultimate transition. In Celtic mythology, the otherworld is a mystical realm associated with spirits, ancestors, and deities. The Banshee's association with the Sidhe, fairy folk, ties her to this realm, reinforcing her role as a spiritual messenger. Her appearances, often near thresholds such as doorways, crossroads, or graveyards, highlight her symbolic connection to boundary spaces. The Banshee's presence serves as a reminder of life's fragility, reflecting humanity's universal anxiety about death and the unknown. In psychospiritual terms, she acts as a mirror for collective fears, externalizing them in a form that can be acknowledged and ritualized. This process allows individuals and communities to confront their mortality in a structured and meaningful way. The Banshee's role as a mourner of noble families ties her to ancestral reverence. In psychospiritual interpretations, this reflects the deep human need to maintain connections with those who have passed. Her cry can be seen as a call to honor one's lineage and to integrate the wisdom and experiences of past generations into the present. The Banshee's solitary nature, often described as wandering alone, lamenting, resonates with fears of isolation and alienation after death. Her role as a messenger may offer reassurance that death is not an abandonment, but a continuation of spiritual connection, bridging the mortal and immortal realms. In spiritual traditions, death is often viewed not as an end, but as a transformation or rebirth. The Banshee, as a harbinger of death, symbolizes this process of renewal. Her cry signals an ending, but endings in mythology frequently lead to new beginnings. This aligns with Celtic beliefs in cyclical time and the eternal nature of the soul. On a psychological level, the Banshee's warnings can be interpreted as a call to confront personal fears, unresolved emotions, or impending changes. Her presence may serve as a guide for individuals navigating their own transformative journeys, urging them to face life's challenges with courage and acceptance. Some interpretations of the Banshee emphasize her cries as an expression of rage or injustice, particularly in tales where she is linked to women who suffered tragic deaths. Her presence can be seen as a reclamation of voice and power, challenging societal taboos around death and mourning. The psycho-spiritual interpretations of the Banshee reveal her profound symbolic depth. As a harbinger of death, she embodies humanity's relationship with mortality, transformation, and the sacred mysteries of life. Her cry resonates not only as a warning but as a call to embrace change, confront fears, and honor the eternal connections between past, present, and future. The Banshee occupies a space between belief and disbelief, straddling the realms of folklore, cultural tradition, and the unexplained. While many revere her as an essential part of Irish heritage, others question the existence of this spectral figure, viewing her as a psychological or social construct. Exploring skepticism surrounding the Banshee allows us to better understand the tension between myth and reality in the human experience. The Banshee legend has survived for centuries through oral tradition, especially in rural Irish communities. The lack of written records during early periods allowed myths to grow, change, and take on new life with each retelling. For skeptics, the reliance on oral accounts raises questions about the authenticity of Banshee stories. Variations in details, exaggerated claims, and the lack of verifiable evidence are often cited as reasons to doubt her existence. Believers often reference first-hand accounts or family stories involving Banshee sightings or wails. Skeptics argue that these accounts may stem from confirmation bias, where people interpret natural phenomena as supernatural because of preconceived cultural beliefs. Anecdotal evidence, while powerful in shaping folklore, lacks the rigor of empirical verification, fueling skepticism about the Banshee's reality. Skeptics often attribute the Banshee's wail to natural sounds that were misinterpreted in pre-modern contexts. Possible explanations include nocturnal animals. Animals such as foxes, owls, or cats can produce high-pitched, eerie cries that might be mistaken for a banshee. Wind and weather. The sound of wind passing through cracks, trees, or valleys can create haunting noises, particularly during stormy or eerie weather conditions. Reports of a spectral woman dressed in white could stem from optical illusions or natural phenomena. For example, mist and fog. The interplay of moonlight and mist can create ghostly shapes. Reflection and shadow. In low light, the human brain is prone to misinterpreting shapes and shadows, especially when primed by fear or cultural expectations. Skeptics frequently point to psychological explanations for Banshee experiences, particularly during times of stress or grief. Sleep paralysis. Many Banshee sightings occur at night, and symptoms of sleep paralysis, including hallucinations, could explain the perception of a ghostly figure. Grief and trauma. The fear of impending death, particularly in times of illness or uncertainty, might manifest as auditory or visual hallucinations, giving rise to banshee-like experiences. Mass hysteria. In close-knit communities, one person's account of hearing the banshee could trigger similar reports, creating a collective belief in her presence. The belief in the banshee can influence perception. If people are already anticipating her arrival as a herald of death, they may subconsciously interpret ambiguous sounds or sights as evidence of her presence. The Catholic Church often viewed folklore like the banshee with skepticism, considering it pagan superstition. While the Church incorporated some Celtic beliefs into Christian practices, it largely dismissed supernatural entities like the banshee as remnants of pre-Christian polytheism. Skeptics aligned with the Church argued that belief in the banshee distracted from proper religious faith and rituals for the dead. During the Enlightenment, increasing emphasis on science and reason led to widespread skepticism about supernatural beings. Figures like William Edward Hartpole Lecky critiqued folklore as irrational and unscientific, viewing banshee stories as products of ignorance and fear rather than evidence of the paranormal. Contemporary skeptics, particularly within academic circles, see the banshee as a metaphorical figure rather than a literal one. Folklorists interpret her as a cultural tool for coping with death. Psychologists view her as an externalization of the subconscious fear of mortality. Skeptics who dismiss the banshee as a literal entity often acknowledge her symbolic significance. Myths like the banshee endure because they resonate with universal human experiences, particularly around death and loss. From this perspective, the banshee may not be real in a physical sense, but she represents a deeper truth about the human need to find meaning in death and the afterlife. Some banshee stories may have originated as exaggerated accounts of real events. For instance, a nocturnal visitor might have been mistaken for a banshee. The lamentations of keeners at funerals could have been embellished over time to include supernatural elements. These stories, while not evidence of banshees, serve as historical reflections of societal attitudes toward death and mourning. Despite widespread skepticism, belief in the banshee remains strong in some rural Irish communities and among the Irish diaspora. For many, the banshee is a symbol of cultural identity, connecting them to their heritage. Personal anecdotes and folklore continue to defy scientific explanation, leaving room for belief in the unexplainable. Even skeptics admit that not all phenomena can be easily explained. Paranormal researchers argue that the banshee's legend might point to unexplored aspects of human perception or consciousness. The banshee legend also raises philosophical questions about the nature of reality. Is it shaped solely by empirical evidence, or can collective belief and cultural tradition also define what is real? For many, the banshee exists in the liminal space between folklore and reality. She is not merely a ghost or a superstitious tale, but a living part of Irish cultural consciousness. Skeptics and believers alike recognize her as a powerful narrative device that addresses universal themes, regardless of her physical existence. Modern approaches to the banshee often aim to reconcile scientific skepticism with cultural appreciation. Whether through academic research, artistic reinterpretations, or personal belief, the banshee remains a dynamic figure who evolves with each generation. The question of whether the banshee is folklore or reality may never be definitively answered. However, her enduring presence in Irish culture and beyond highlights her importance as a symbol of humanity's quest to understand death, the unknown, and the boundaries of existence. Skepticism serves not to diminish her legend, but to deepen our exploration of the human experience, blending science, tradition, and the mysteries of the supernatural. Like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Got a story idea? Drop it in the comments below. I'm always looking for new adventures to share. Until next time, stay curious and keep telling your own stories.